Genesis chapter 20. As we continue to look into the life of Abraham, I think we would all agree that there just does not seem to be a dull moment in the life of Abraham. This is a guy whose life can be summarized by two different images. Number one, a tent, and number two, an altar. And so as we read it, it looks like Abraham is, from one big event in his life to the next. And it's always in one of those areas. It always involves the tent, the sojourning, the pilgrimage of life, the earthly stuff, how we relate to earth, or the altar, his worship with the Lord, his relationship with the Lord. And I guess that makes sense because really that's all there is. There's this earthly pilgrimage, and then there's the altar. Then there's our relationship with the Lord. And we're kind of doing the same thing in life. We're going from one big event to the next. Sometimes it's, the earthly pilgrimage. One big thing after another. One challenge after another. One test after another. One problem after another. But sometimes it's the altar for us too. It's one big movement of God in our life after the other. And really, the way to keep that balance in your favor, the way to keep that balance in a way that helps you and encourages you and blesses you is to stay near to the altar. Because that's the thing that alters our life. A-L-T-E-R-E-D. And if you're like Abraham, whereas you're traveling, as you're going through life, as you're experiencing things, you're erecting those altars as you go, you're in good shape. It's when you get too stuck in the earthly stuff and the life stuff, and you forget about the altars, and you forget about the worship, and you forget about your relationship with the Lord, that you tend to have problems. Well, as we approach Genesis 20, we don't forget where we've come from. There's been a lot taking place in this book so far. We saw Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed because of sin. And think what you want, for a little while, the world was a better place because of that. Just for a little while. And we saw the book on Lot's life closed, permanently sealed. We don't read any more of his story. And, of course, we have Abraham and Sarah still what? Still waiting for that child to be born. Oh my goodness. It seems like we're just agonizing with them as we wait and as we wait for that promise of God to be fulfilled. And now in Genesis 20, Abraham is on the move again. We don't know why. We don't know if the Lord is inspiring his movements. We don't know if the Lord said, well, you're in Canaan. Move around. Check out the land. We don't really know why Abraham is on the move now, but we do know this. The Lord is going to use this movement, this travel from Abraham in Genesis 20 to do what? To let Abraham be tested again in something that he has already been tested in. We know how he did the first time, and let's see how he does the second time. Genesis chapter 20, verse 1. And Abraham journeyed from there to the south and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gerar, or Gerar, however you want to pronounce it, but it is a hard G sound. We know that for sure. All right, Abraham on the move. He was hanging out there in Hebron. That seems to be Abraham's home, if we can say that about a guy who is specifically called to be a sojourner and a pilgrim and travel around. But Hebron seems to be, home base for Abraham. And he leaves Hebron in verse 1 of Genesis 20. And he travels down to stay in an area called Gerar. And that is a little bit south. It's mostly west of where Hebron was, of where Abraham was stationed. And that is a Philistine country. It is a Philistine city. Abraham is not far, if you look at this on a Bible map, he is not far from home here. He didn't do what he did before when he made that trip down to Egypt. where he left Canaan. He left home. He left the boundaries. He's still in the boundaries. He's not far from home. He's a little south, mostly west, over there toward the Mediterranean Sea. You know, we've been talking a lot about the Dead Sea down south. Well, if you're looking at it this way, the Dead Sea down south and the Sea of Galilee up here. Well, now Abraham's heading over to this body of water, the Mediterranean Sea, the coastline there, not far from the Gaza Strip, where the Gaza Strip is today, a little south and east of the Gaza Strip. And he's in Philistine country. Still Canaan, but at this time, Gerar is a Philistine land, and there's a Philistine king there named Abimelech, and we're going to get to see an encounter between Abimelech and Abraham here. We know this, that the Philistines, they're not all that strong right now as Abraham travels into Philistine country, but they keep getting strong. They're going to be known throughout the Bible as a very warlike people, a people that are tough to get along with. They are going to be notorious and infamous enemies of Israel for a long time. For the longest time in our biblical account, they will be the most formidable foe that the Israelites will face. And there's Abraham right there in Philistine country. Verse 2, now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, here we go, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. So here we go again. This is Genesis chapter 12 all over again. This is Genesis chapter 12, take 2. No, we are not in the wrong section of the Bible and rereading something we already covered. This is a different account. This is the makeup test for Abraham. Did you ever get those in grade school or high school where you do so bad on a test? I mean, so horrible on a test that your teacher has pity for you, has sympathy, compassion for you, and they say, awful, just awful. I can't let that be your grade. Let's give you a retest. Let's let you take it again. Hopefully you can get a better grade in the retest, and that's exactly what this is for Abraham. He's getting another chance to be tested in an area of his life that he failed miserably in before, and he did it again. He missed it again. He messed up again. Now, in Genesis 12, when Abraham pulled this before, Sarah was 65 years old. 65 years old, and she was a looker, and Abraham was worried about losing her, and so they developed this scheme. In Genesis chapter 20, she is now 89 or 90 years old. Keep in mind, she's also pregnant or very close to being pregnant. But Abraham figures she's still got it. She has not lost a thing. 90 years old, and she's still so beautiful that if these pagan kings see her, they're going to want to take her from me and kill me to get her. And again, Abraham is right. Abraham is right because Abimelech is interested in this 90-year-old knockout of a woman. We take a look at this story and we kind of figure out the time placement in Abraham and Sarah's life. We recently read that the Lord said this time next year, Sarah's going to have a child, that promised child, right? Now, when we look at this realistically, we're kind of figuring that Sarah either is not pregnant yet, or if she is pregnant, she's not showing. Because I just would kind of have to figure that if she's 90 years old and she has a baby bump, I don't think this story happens. I don't think Abimelech is interested in her and falling for the story about the sister and taking her into the harem. So we figure that pretty much puts us between the moment that God said that to Abraham and Sarah, and that 3-month period before the pregnancy begins. We're somewhere in there, or we're early in the pregnancy, hopefully before the morning sickness. Might have been a giveaway in the harem. But we're somewhere early in that period. We figure that Isaac's conception hasn't happened yet, or if it has, that gestation period isn't very far along, very early in the process. And we come back to the same half-truth that Abraham and Sarah told the Pharaoh down in Egypt, that same half-truth, which, again, there is an element of truth to it. She's my sister. But leaving out that major part of it, that she's also my wife. Yes, true, she is my half-sister. Same dad, different mom. Remember, we talked about that. Element of truth to this, but still, I mean, we've said it how many times now? We might as well do it again. A half-truth is still a whole lie, or a total lie, or a complete lie. Right? And so, you just start to look at the family, and you start to see a family fault line, I think. Like, what is it with the family? Well, more specifically, what is it with the men of Abraham's family that it seems like they're constantly throwing the women to the wolves? Abraham has done this before with his wife when she was 65 years old. He does this again now that she's 90. Lot didn't fall too far from the tree, and Lot was ready to throw out his 2 daughters to the Sodomites. What is with this family? It's a major responsibility for the men to be protectors of the wives, protectors of the women. We're going to see that spoken about, touched on here in this passage. But we're just wallowing in these same problems. Here's what we do know. Abraham has grown in those 25 years. When he began to journey and step out for the Lord at 75 years old. He's 100 now, or 99, real close to 100. He has grown. There's been great changes in his life. It's not all bad. We're seeing less of the bad, but here's what we do see. This one area of Abraham's life that after 25 years he still has not got control over, and he still does not have in the place that it needs to be. And I think we can sympathize with that. I think we can understand that. For some of us, when we came to the Lord, there was a gigantic change in who we were, our character, our nature, our likes and dislikes, major change in us even at the moment of conversion. But how many of you have had one area of your life, or maybe a few areas of your life, where those chips did not fall quite so easily as you plugged along for the Lord? They remained with you for 5 years. 5 years later, after serving the Lord, you're still fighting and resisting some of those same tenacious battles and those same areas of struggle that you did when you started. 10 years later, you're still fighting that. 15 years later, that's still your major problem. That's still your major hurdle, your giant. And we can go a long time sometimes with still that one thing that we've been dragging along with us in the whole time, struggling against and often failing in. And we have a word for what that is. It's called a stronghold. That word is used for a purpose. It is a hold in your life. It is a footing in your life. It is something that is attached to you, that is in there pretty deep and has a good hold on you. Something that's in there so strong that it takes more than just wishful thinking to get rid of. But it takes real battle, and it takes daily battle and yearly battle and into the decades, however long it may take you. Well, that's what Abraham has in this one area of life. He's the kind of guy that can tell you, I trust God for my eternal salvation. but he's not the kind of guy that can say, I trust God with my wife and my life, my physical life. And I think that makes sense. I think it's really a lot easier to trust God with what we don't see yet, the eternal. I think it's a lot tougher to trust God with what we do see, the physical, our protection, our health, our life. It just seems so easy for us to say, I trust that the Lord is going to get me to heaven. He's made me that promise. I trust him with my eternal life. But how much tougher is it for us to trust God with the day-to-day stuff, our personal protection, our financial well-being, our relationships, husband and wife, boyfriend and girlfriend, brother and sister? How much more difficult is that for us? Well, that's Abraham's soft spot, sore spot. Spurgeon once wrote a quote, and he said this: we possess no more religion than we can find at the times of greatest trouble. And I think that's a really good statement. We possess no more religion than what we can find at the times of greatest trouble. That's simply saying you are only as strong as you are when you're facing your toughest battle. That's where you know where your strength is. If you hit that toughest battle, that toughest area of life, that stronghold, and that's the thing you can't kick, that's the measure of your strength. That's the measure of your spirituality right there. That's the limit. It's where you hit the roof and you can't go any higher. Well, you can go higher. That's the good news, of course. You can go higher. You can conquer those things. And this is just not Abraham's year. But it could be yours. This could be the year you conquer those strongholds in your life. Verse 3, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now I want to read the next verse so we can talk about these together. Verse 4, but Abimelech had not come near her, and he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Now, I know we would probably automatically settle on what we think the Lord is saying here. And I think we would look at this right on the surface and say, this does not look good. It looks like the Lord in a dream has spoken to the king and threatened to take his life. And then Abimelech responds by saying, Lord, are you going to slay? Are you going to kill this entire nation? That is possible. Doesn't make as much sense to me as something else. Here's what I think is happening here. The follow-up to Abraham's mistake in Genesis 12 is the same follow-up that God gives to Abraham as a method of help here in Genesis 20, and that is that he interfered with the reproductive systems of that region in Egypt, and now he's done the same thing here in Gerar. And if you look down to verse 18, you'll see that. You'll see that the Lord has somehow afflicted the men here in Gerar, and he has also made it so that, just look at verse 18 real quick, so that the wombs of the females in this house of Abimelech had been closed up by the Lord. The Lord had to do this. The Lord had to shut down the reproductive systems of every person in that city because the Lord is protecting from future question marks. Because when that son, Isaac, is born, the Lord doesn't want there to be any question marks about whether or not something happened there in Gerar. There should be no question in anyone's mind. We don't want that to be, a scandal or a potential scandal. And so the Lord here's what he's done. He has deadened the reproductive systems of that city. The men, whatever their afflictions were, whatever their problem was, no one was feeling very romantic that night. The women, even if the men were feeling romantic, romantically inclined, guess what? The women, none of them could get pregnant. And it is my opinion that the king understands what has happened as the Lord is speaking to him. And when the Lord says to the king that he's dead, I do believe the Lord is talking about him being dead reproductively. And I believe that what the king is saying in his response there in verse 4, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? What he's saying is that if this persists, if this continues, if we are dead reproductively, our nation is going to come to an end. Unlike Sodom and Gomorrah, there's straight people in this city. And we know you got to be straight and have future kids to keep your nation going. We want that. Lord, if you stop that, if you stop our reproductive systems, if things stay as they are now, this entire nation is going to come to a crashing halt. Now, if you believe that the Lord has threatened this man's life physically and the nation physically because the king has taken this one woman as wife, that's completely up to you, entirely up to you if you want to believe that. I don't think that's anything we should part ways over. But you can look at that, you can research those words, you can pick apart the context and decide for yourself. But verse 5, did he not say to me, she is my sister? And she, even she herself said, he is my brother. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. Let's read verse 6 too. We'll talk about these two together as well. And God said to him in a dream, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart, for I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. All right, so we wouldn't, I almost want to say that Abimelech is playing it pretty fast and loose with the word integrity. I mean, he does have a harem. So I wouldn't be too quick to say this guy has integrity across the board. But the Lord agrees with him that on this issue, on this single issue of Sarah and Abraham, he does have integrity. What is integrity? It's a tough word to define, I think. I think the best way that I can define the word integrity is that it's having a high standard of morals and having those regardless of where you are. It's being the same person that you are in public or on Facebook that you are at home in front of your computer at 3 a.m. That's the way I look at integrity. It's not what we convey. It's not what we say we believe. It's not what we show ourselves to be in public. It's who we are all the time. That's integrity. And this guy, sure, that he has integrity in this area. The Lord agrees with him. And the Lord says this, because you had integrity, I helped you out. I kept you from messing up. It would be the custom for every king to sleep with that new wife that was brought into his harem on the first night that she was brought into his harem. That was the custom. New wife, new member of the harem, you sleep with that woman that night. That did not happen. And that was because of the Lord. And I think there's a good lesson in that, and that is that when it's truly in our hearts not to sin against the Lord, He will help us to not sin against the Lord. Now, I have examples from my life that are ultra personal, so I can't share them. But I will say this. I have experienced in my life the Lord's direct help to keep me out of sin because He knew my heart was not to sin. Now, not everyone can say that. There are plenty of people that their intention is to sin. This guy, in integrity, was the kind of guy that, yes, though he had a harem of women, if he knew that a woman was married, he would not do what Abraham assumed he would do. He would not kill the husband to get the pretty woman. He would leave that woman as being off bounds, out of range, not his, a man of integrity. And it's the same for us, that when we desire to live a life that is pleasing to the Lord, He helps us. We can't be the kind of people that are pre-planning our sin or providing the methods for future sin, leaving the door open for future failures, and then, trying to play it coy with the Lord and, I slipped again, Lord. I fell again. As we said before, the Lord doesn't play those games. He does know your heart, and if He knows that you want to please Him, if you have a heart of integrity, He will help you. This is an unbeliever. This is a heathen. This is a pagan, and the Lord is helping him not to sin. So I like that picture. By the way, yes, we see the Lord speaking to an unbeliever in a dream. Maybe we might want to ask the question, well, does the Lord really do that? Will the Lord speak to sinners? Will the Lord work in the lives of heathens? I would just say this, He's the Lord. He can do whatever He wants. And if He wants to speak to sinners that don't know Him, He can speak to them in dreams. He can speak to their ears so loudly that they actually hear Him. The Lord can do anything He wants. We see Him working in the life of a complete unbeliever here. And by the time this story is done, this guy's at least not a complete unbeliever. He knows who the God of Israel is. Verse 7, now therefore, restore the man's wife. Ooh, listen closely to this. This is good. This is juicy. Listen to this. Restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet. Hold that thought. We're definitely coming back to that. And he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. All right? Again, we could be talking about reproductive. We could be talking about in progeny, in future generations, future nation security. We could be talking about these things. We could be talking about physical judgment. But I want to focus on this in verse 7. Restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet. Now, I think if there was ever a time for the Lord to be kind of tight-lipped about the fact that Abraham is one of His prophets, it might be now. If there was ever a time where God might not want to be so open and forthright about having an association and affiliation with Abraham, it might be in this moment, because his prophet is failing pretty severely in creating a mess. But I want you to see that the Lord does not disassociate Himself from Abraham, even though what God has here is a problematic prophet. He has not cast Abraham away. He has not shunned or shied away from that connection, that recognition of Abraham as being one of His. Tells me that the Lord is not too quick to pull the plug on us. He's not too quick to can us. He's not too quick to disassociate Himself from us. It reminds me of Romans 11, chapter 29. This is essentially an Old Testament teaching for Romans 11:29 that says that the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable, or without repentance in the King James Version Bible. That means when the Lord gifts you with something, when He gives you gifts and talents and abilities, He doesn't take those back, regardless of what you do with them. When the Lord calls you, when He has a calling on your life to fill a certain role in a church, in a ministry, or that calling to good Christian fruit, what God calls you to, He does not take that calling back. He never says, well, I didn't know you were going to act like that. I didn't know you were going to give me a black eye in public. I didn't know you were going to make me look bad. You know what? You're uncalled. I changed my mind. You're uncalled. I take it back. No longer called. But the Lord doesn't do that. His gifts are permanent and irrevocable. His calling is permanent and irrevocable. We see a lot of people in this world with gifts and callings that they are not using for God. Their gifts and their callings came from God. They're just not using them for God. And I could name the singers. And I could name the actors. I could name the talented. I could show you that their gifts and their abilities were God-given, even though their lyrics are horrible and sleazy and disgusting and counterproductive to Christian faith. Those are gifts from God. Those are things that God gives, talents and abilities, callings on their life to inspire with music. Not used for Him, but the gift and the calling is there. Now, we don't focus so much on that. What we focus on is us, because what we see happen a lot is God put a calling on a person's life, or if God put a gifting in a person's life, that God wants to be used for His glory, for the ministry, for His work, for His kingdom. And we see many years pass, and we see those gifts and those callings suppressed. And you get this question a lot in ministry. You'll have people come up to you that have been in a backslidden state for a long time, and they'll say things like this: I just don't feel like the Lord could ever use me because of what I did. I've been away so long. You know, I knew the Lord called me to preach when I was 12, and I'm 68 years old now, whatever it might be. And we say it's too late, you know. God can't use me now. I did this. I messed up my life in this way, or I wrecked things. I suppressed the giftings or the callings for so long. Would God really still want those gifts and callings to come out in my life? Romans chapter 11, verse 29. The gifts and the calling of God are irrevocable. It's never too late to put those giftings and callings to proper use. You never fail Him too much or too hard that you become uncalled or that your gifts are lost. Doesn't happen. Verse 8. So Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and told all these things in their hearing. And the men were very much afraid. Well, so much for keeping this under wraps. I mean, if Abraham was hoping to keep this a secret sin, that cat just got out of the bag. That cat is loose. Because Abimelech has now told all of his servants and everyone within earshot about what the Lord had spoken to him and about what Abraham and Sarah have done. The secret's out. Verse 9, and Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? Why have I offended you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? You have done deeds to me that ought not to be done. This is a heathen king that is reproving and rebuking the prophet of God, Abraham. By the way, first time that word prophet is used in the Bible, and it's to call Abraham a prophet. You remember that prophets are not just people who speak about the future. That's not what the word prophecy entirely means. That's part of it, but prophecy is just speaking on behalf of God. You know, when I get up here and I read the scriptures, when I read what God said, that's prophecy. And Abraham was a prophet in that sense. He's a spokesman for God. He speaks to people from God. And this heathen king is reproving and rebuking and exhorting the man of God. And it's a shame when something like that happens, when we give the world reason and cause to rebuke us, to reprove us. But it does happen, doesn't it? Genuinely, it happens. We mess up, we make ourselves look bad, and the world corrects us. And I know the world tries to correct us over a whole bunch of stuff, and most of it is unjust. We're not talking about that. Yeah, they're always going to be reproving and rebuking what we teach and what we believe from the scriptures, but I'm talking about those times where we mess up, where we wreck our witness, and the world calls us on it and puts us to shame. I've been in that situation before. It doesn't feel good. Verse 10, then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you have done this thing? What were you thinking, Abraham? Verse 9, what did I ever do to you? Have I offended you in some way? Did I bring this on? No, Abraham, you started this. Verse 10, what were you thinking? This shouldn't be done. Verse 11, and Abraham said, because I thought, here this is again. We just talked about this on Friday in the adult class at VBS when we were talking about Naaman, the leper who came to be healed, and his discontentment was over what? He said this, well, I thought the prophet was going to do this, and I'm disappointed because it didn't go the way I thought. And Abraham is in the same place. What were you thinking, Abraham? Verse 11, Abraham says, well, because I thought, and that does get us into a lot of trouble when we think. And he's gonna go on to say what he was thinking. But you notice he does say, I thought. I thought this was the reality. He's not saying, look, God told me this was the way to handle it. He can't say, well, Abimelech, I prayed and this is the direction that the Lord led me. He can't say, this is what the Spirit prompted me to do. All he can say is this, well, I thought, surely the fear of God is not in this place, and they will kill me on account of my wife. You see what he says here? I did not think that the people of this city would respect my God and my morals. And because I didn't think that, I took matters into my own hands. I devised my own plans. I thought if I said I was married to this woman, that you would say, well, we don't care about what your God says is morally acceptable. We only care about what we want, and we want your wife. So you're dead. Here's the best thing to do. Give the Lord a chance. Give the Lord a chance. If you can do this, if you can stop and pray about it first, great. Instead of being a thinker and doer first, be a prayer first. So then you can say, well, because I prayed. You can answer those questions that way. Arlyn, why did you handle this situation this way? Well, because I prayed, and this is the way that I was directed. Instead of saying, well, I just thought. I mean, how many bad conversations have started that way? Well, I just thought you were mad. Or, I just thought it wasn't going to work out. So I set things up the way I thought they should be. Well, how about this? Let's not assume the worst in a situation, because that's what Abraham has done here. He's assumed the worst about this place. They're not going to care about God. They're not going to care about my moral beliefs. They're not going to support that or coordinate with that, work alongside of that. No, it's just going to be awful. Instead of assuming the worst, go into the situation and see what the Lord sets up. And if it's bad when you get in the situation, guess what? At least you haven't taken matters into your own hands and worked outside of the will of God. Maybe you're in a situation where you need rescued by God, but that's great because God will rescue you, and then that's going to build your strength and faith for the next time that you need His rescue. Verse 12, but indeed, she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. He's defending himself here. He's saying, look, there's some element of truth to it. She is my sister, truly. I mean, yeah, she's my wife also, but I mean, there's some truth in there. It's self-defense. It's being okay with bending and stretching the truth a little bit because the truth was in there. We said in Genesis 12 when we covered that this is bearing false witness. It's every bit as bad as a full-on lie. It's bearing false witness. It's saying one thing and implying something that isn't true, even if what's being said is true. She's my sister. Well, yeah, but she's also your wife. And so as he implies there to the city that Well, I can't say it. I was going to make a political joke. I can't do it. I don't got the guts. Verse 13. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me. In every place, wherever we go, say of me, he is my brother. Did you catch that? Abraham has just made a confession here. The moment that the Lord called him to start traveling, to start being a pilgrim, look at verse 13. The moment that God called him to begin to move through pagan territory, Abraham pulled his wife aside and said, honey, I want you to do something for me. You are beautiful. And I need you to protect me. So let's do this. Here's our approach to every situation like this that we might be in the future. Here's going to be our premeditated approach. We're not going to pray about it. We're not going to trust the Lord about it. Here's our premeditated approach. We're going to lie about it. So see, this was not just a hang-up or a weak spot. It's not just an area that Abraham keeps stumbling into. You know, we talk sometimes about stumbling into sin. Well, the hard pastors will say that can't happen. The hard pastors will say you walk right into sin with both feet and eyes wide open. Well, I don't know. I think sometimes we get tricked and we stumble into sin. But this is not stumbling into sin. This is preparing to sin. This is premeditating to sin. This is saying, hey, this area of my life, I don't have the strength and faith for. So when it comes to this area of my life, we're going to do it the dishonest way. We're going to lie. And I want you to think about this, verse 13. Based on verse 13, I think we should consider the fact that though we have two accounts of Abraham doing this, now that we know verse 13 is in the Bible, now that we know this was the premeditated approach, I don't think we can rule out the fact that I don't think we can rule out the possibility that there may have been many more occasions where this happened. Many more than 2 times even. This could have happened in every city they went into. Oh, that's my sister. That's her plan. Fools them every time. Works like a charm. No. Verse 14. Then Abimelech took sheep, oxen, and male and female servants and gave them to Abraham. And he restored Sarah, his wife, to him. Verse 15. And Abimelech said, see, my land is before you. Dwell where it pleases you. Have you noticed that every time Abraham lies, he gets wealthier and wealthier and wealthier? Sometimes there can be a payoff to sin. Abraham could be thinking, I got a great thing going here. I'm going to be the wealthiest man to ever walk the earth because I'm going to tell some whoppers in my lifetime. I lie and people give me stuff. Man, that could be a full-time career. Oh, it is. That's right. Lawyers. No, I'm kidding. So here we are again, and why, with all the trouble that Abraham has caused to this little city and this king, why lavish him with gifts? Well, I know the answer to that question. Here's why. Sure, it could be a little bit of, look, we just want you to get out of here. We want you to pick somewhere to settle down, even if it's our land. We want you to go there. We don't want you causing our little city any more problems. But more than that, here's what it is. You remember when, as we just read in verse 8, when Abimelech called the group together and told them the story, told them about the dream, the encounter with God, the situation with Abraham. Do you remember what happened? Verse 8 said that the men were very much afraid. So here's why there is the desire to lavish gifts on this problematic prophet, this stumbling prophet Abraham, here's what it is. Though Abimelech and the city is not impressed with Abraham, though they're not impressed with God's prophet because of that prophet's behavior, guess what? They are still awfully impressed with Abraham's God. Look at verse 8 again. God put the fear of God in those people. And so even though they don't respect Abraham because of the goof-ups here, they still have an awful lot of respect for Abraham's God. And I guess you could look at it like this. Abraham is the 13,000-pound elephant in the room. And where does a 13,000-pound elephant sit? Anywhere it wants to. This guy is trouble. He's caused trouble, but he's God's. And we're afraid of God. And so what Abraham wants, we're going to give Abraham. He's the 13,000-pound elephant in the room. If he wants to take a spot of our land, just go for it. Just go your separate way. Be okay with us because if Abraham stays upset with us or at odds with us, then so is Abraham's God. I hope you at least get that much. I hope you don't go making a mess of your relationships with unbelievers. But if you do, I hope they still come away with this respect for your God. They may see you failing, trying but failing. But I hope they see this. I hope they see the greatness of the God that you are trying to serve. Verse 16. This is sharp. Then to Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given your brother..." Ouch. Didn't say husband. He knows it's her husband now. But he doesn't say husband. He says, "I have given your," quote unquote, "brother. I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Indeed, this vindicates you before all who are with you and before everybody." Thus she was rebuked. Very tricky bunch of words here. What's really being said? There's some disagreement about this. It depends on which manuscript you're looking at. The newer versions will tell you that what's being said here is that Abimelech is scolding her and saying, your brother should have been a covering for you, should have been a protection for you to keep you safe. So here's some money to go buy yourself a covering, to cover up your beauty, because your husband is not acting like a husband. In fact, I'll just call him a brother. Now, if you look at the King James Version and you go by the Textus Receptus, those manuscripts that were used to translate the King James Version and the New King James Version, the Textus Receptus, and not the majority text that's used by the newer versions, it's going to tell you that, well, actually, let's just read it real quick. I came prepared. And unto Sarah he said, behold, I have given thy brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, he is to thee a covering of the eyes. Or in other words, he is supposed to be for you a covering. And so I think the meaning we're looking at here is a scolding. Your brother is not being a husband to you at all, and he's not protecting you. Verse 17. So Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female servants. Then they bore children. The city's healed. They can have kids again. Things are working. Verse 18. For the Lord had closed up the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Now, verse 17, we'll close with this. Though Abraham wasn't being a very good prophet of God in this chapter, he still functions as one. God treats him as one, and he still functions as one. To remedy this situation, God still needs to use the calling and the role of Abraham to pray for this man so that this man and that little city, that nation, whatever you want to call it, can be healed. And so what I see here gives me hope for those times in life when we Christians have wrecked our witness, ruined our witness, and lost our influence with people. Are there people like that in your life? Don't answer me, because if you say no, I know you're lying. Are there people in your life that you have messed up your relationship with them so bad that you just know your witness for Christ to that person is completely ruined? That you have wrecked any influence you could have on that person for Christ because of you, because of how you messed up, because of how you failed, because of the mess you made for that person. I think if you've been serving the Lord even for a few years, then you have people in your life that you have either completely wrecked your witness or influence to, or have greatly damaged it. But verse 17, what do you do if you find yourself in that situation that there are people in your life that you love, but you know you've ruined things between you and them? And so what do you do? Well, I like this. Verse 17. Here's what you can do. You can still pray for them. You may have wrecked your chance to speak on God's behalf to that person, but you can still pray for them. And isn't that what the Lord tells us? Pray for our enemies. Because here's the thing. You're marching to the beat of a specific drum in your Christianity. You are commanded to forgive those that have hurt you and those that hate you. So that's what you do. But if you've wrecked things with an unbeliever, you have to know they're not necessarily marching to that same beat and that same drum. They are not so pressed in their spirit to forgive people that have hurt them or hated them or harmed them in some way like you are. And you can't change that. But here's what you can do. You can pray for that person. And specifically, you can pray for that person's salvation, because once that person gets saved, well, you've finally got them where you want them. Now they're marching to that same beat and that same drum that you are, where Christ is going to speak to their heart to forgive. You're brothers and sisters now. And so that person that you may have lost influence to, you can pray for. God can bring them into the kingdom, make them a brother or sister, and you can get that influence back because of the healing that God does through forgiveness. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Never stop praying for people. When all else fails, pray for them. If they hate you, well, maybe leave them alone. Pray for them.